Hi, and welcome to Behind the Lines. I'm Diane Dayton. Today we're going to talk to someone who's not a stranger to our set at all. In fact, this is going to be his 12th appearance, and he has quite a history too. For those of you who don't remember, Dave Romeo is a motivational speaker, results coach. He's an author. In fact, we're going to be talking about books 21 and 22. He also is a Guinness world record holder for bass fishing for over 30 years. And I thought this was really cool, so that's why we always talk about how he released 25,000 bass in a span of 25 years, and he's fished all over the world. The book that we're going to talk about today is Learning from Your Turning Point. So I guess, Dave, it was time, with the history that you have, to reflect on these turning points and to make that into a book, right?
Absolutely. I mean, what better time? You know, now I'm in my 60s, and you kind of look back over your life at the moments that meant the most, that had the biggest impact on your life. And the thing is, they don't just happen consecutive days. They could happen years apart, but it might only be a split second that makes such a big difference.
Yeah, it really does. So how do we define a turning point?
You know, I looked it up because I wanted to make sure that I was giving people good information. And this is what I found. A turning point is a time at which a decisive change takes place in a certain situation, and it's especially true if it's one that's beneficial to you.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So there are quite a few of those too. So this book is really personal to you, and you get into stories as well. Expound on that.
You know, I've had editors say to me, I don't know how you could write such a personal book. You're never going to be able to do that. I don't think any of my books are as personal as this particular one, because they just span all the lessons occurred over a lifetime.
Wow. And this really is a retrospect of your life too, isn't it?
It is. I try to go in chronological order.
Okay. So how far back does this go?
Well, I mean, I could probably do even earlier, but I think one of the most memorable ones happened when I was only 10 years old.
All right.
And it was just my dad and I, and we were driving somewhere together. And I don't remember where we were going, but this had to be in the mid-60s or so. And wherever we were going, we stopped for gas. Now, you know, back then, everything isn't the way it is now, like a gas station with a convenience store. They didn't have air conditioning. So the attendant came out and he pumped the gas, and we sat in the car. And meanwhile, when he came back and gave my father the change, I was sitting there and my father was counting the money, and he said, "Oh, wait a second, he gave me too much money, I'll be right back." So he went into the store. And I could see them, and the windows are open, so I'm sitting in the car and I'm looking at him explaining it, and you can't hear everything, but you could see the expression when the man realizes, oh, I gave this man too much money. And I don't know why, but the man looked out the window and he saw me sitting in the car, and he just looked at me and said, "Your father is an honest man." And of all the memories I have growing up with my parents, I had great parents, that one little experience has just become kind of a defining relationship and the way I saw my father. You know, when you're a kid, I think most people think everybody's father is an honest man. Why did he think that that was so significant? But of course, as you get older, you realize that's not always the case. So it just became more and more meaningful to me over the years.
Wow.
There's another one that I remember right after I got my first job. You know, I was working for a temporary agency, and they sent me to a lumber yard, and then I worked for 2 weeks, and a few weeks later, the lumberyard called me back and they said, "We want you to work with us. We want you to drive the truck. We want you to tote around lumber." So I knew to wear work gloves. Well, that's what I did know. However, there was something I didn't know. About the second day I was there, somebody introduced me to the foreman for the lumberyard, and I went to shake his hand with my work glove on. And he shook my hand, and he pulled the work glove off, and he threw it on the ground. He goes, "You don't shake somebody's hand with a work glove on." Now, Diane, granted, I should have known that lesson before, but I guarantee you, nobody had to teach it to me twice. So I couldn't even tell you what his name was.
Wow.
But I never forgot that lesson he taught me.
Well, lessons do come from all different places at all different times, Dave.
Not only that, but they also happen when you least expect them. And this is another one that must have happened around the same time, right after I graduated from college. And I needed to run an errand in an office building. So I delivered whatever I was delivering, and I got back in the elevator. And just as the doors were about to close, this man stepped in, and he stood there, and we're going down. It's only about 2 floors. And he said, "So what are you doing?" I mean, here's an 18-year-old kid. I said, "Well, I'm just killing time." And I will never forget this, Diane. He said, "Son, whatever you do, don't ever kill time because you will never get it back. Well, when I was 18, I didn't have the same appreciation for time that I have now, being in my 60s. But that lesson just stayed with me. I never even saw his face. He never even turned around to make eye contact with me.
Right.
But I never forgot that lesson. And you know how driven I am to do things. And I think that there was a part of it in the back of my mind from that man saying, don't waste your time.
Wow, that's significant.
I thought so.
So really, they can change your life, and they do, if you're aware.
Yes. And if you remember, I did this Learning from Your Turning Points seminar not too long ago. And one of the stories that I wanted to include was one of my top 5 biggest turning points. And this is one of them. I used to work on Long Island in New York, where I'm originally from. And I was a tax consultant. And that meant that I had all these corporations as clients. So if one of them bought another company or sold a company, I needed to notify all of the states. So I had to have good contacts at every state in the union, including Pennsylvania. Well, I had this lady who was a great contact in Pennsylvania. And so whenever I called, I always asked for her. And one day I called, asked for her like always, and somebody else answered the phone. And she said, well, she's taken another job and I've taken over her job. So she said, I think I heard of you. Did you win some sort of fishing contest? I said, well, actually, I have a Guinness World Record for bass fishing. So we started to talk, and she told me that her brothers fished. So I sent her a bunch of lures for her brothers. She was very helpful. She was knowledgeable. She was friendly. And so anytime I called Pennsylvania after that, I always asked for her. And this went on for over a year before we ever met. Well, back then, her name was Kim Trout. Today, her name is Kim Romeo. And what I learned from that turning point is sometimes a phone call can change your life forever.
Wow.
And the other thing I learned from that experience that I always say is, if you could ever find a good, friendly, knowledgeable, helpful contact in state government, don't take any chances. Just marry them. So I have no complaints.
Yeah, no, that's good. So this obviously changed your life. You know, you have your life partner. These turning points can also make a huge difference in your career and really pay off too.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things that happened to me is I worked as a printing recruiter for many years, and then I transitioned out of that as a coach and also as a seminar presenter. Well, I was working in the staffing company during that transition, but I wasn't doing any more interviews. Well, one day, one of our recruiters was out sick. And she called in and she said, can you do me a favor? I have a salesman coming in this afternoon for an interview. I'm not able to come in. Would you mind taking the interview for me? Well, I hadn't done an interview for a while, but I said, sure, that'll be fun. So I was sitting with this man, and he was so pleasant and fun. We had great rapport. We were getting along wonderfully. And as I was getting ready to get his identification so I could get him registered, he opened up his wallet and he said, oh, here, Dave, you might want to see this. And I looked at it, and Diane, he had an index card. And on the index card, he had written down all of his personal goals from the previous year.
Okay.
And because it was from the previous year, the results were checked off. So I could see his sales numbers, the accounts that he pulled in, and I was just mesmerized by this card. I said, this is a goal list. I've heard about writing down your goals. I never saw anybody who did it before.
Right.
And what happened was I said, well, I could do this. This is easy. So I just took an index card and I wrote down 5 goals. And at the end of the year, 4 of the 5 were done. Well, after that, I was hooked. And so I started with 100 goals the next year, eventually got up to 200. And then after that, I just did 300 every year, to the point now where over the last 19 years, I have written down 5,200 goals and completed 5,200 goals. Just imagine what your life would look like if the last 5,200 goals you wrote down were all checked off.
Wow, it's pretty amazing.
I'm so glad
amazing. Yeah.
that that recruiter was out sick that day,
Yeah.
and that he was the man that needed somebody else to interview him.
Yeah, that changed your life. That's a turning point. And you also talk about expecting the unexpected, because a lot of this is unexpected.
Well, it is. And again, probably another one of the biggest turning points in my life happened before I was getting married. I lost my job 6 weeks before the wedding date. I was living in New York. My wife, or my fiance at the time, was still in Pennsylvania. She had just given her notice. And the night before, I had just put down a $1,600 deposit to rent a house in New York. And I said to her, you're going to come here and not have a job. I don't have a job. Over the course of a weekend, we decided instead of her moving to New York, I would move to Pennsylvania and I would find a job. Well, the only problem was, back then, I only knew 3 people in Pennsylvania besides my fiance. I knew her father, her mother, and the guy that owned the tackle shop. So I did not have any network. There was no work that I did locally being done in that area. But as a result of that, I came here, I became a recruiter, and I became the #1 recruiter in the nation for the printing industry. I'd never done that before. I started doing seminars eventually, became a coach, became a television host, and I can't believe the number of great friends that I have made in this area, more than I had even in New York. And I just absolutely fell in love with Pennsylvania when I came here.
Yeah. Well, we need to take a brief pause, but when we come back, we're going to address what happens if you don't take advantage of the turning point. Stay with us.
LCTV 66 is your community channel, and your donations keep us on the air and help to produce more local programs. Send your tax-deductible donation of $500, $100, or more to the address on the screen. Or think of it this way: for the price of a couple of movie tickets, you can help support your community channel. Send what you can and be a part of all that is good about Lancaster County. Thank you for your tax-deductible donation to LCTV 66, Lancaster's Connection.
Welcome back to Behind the Lines, and we are definitely learning from our turning points. Another new book from Dave Romeo. So how do we learn from a turning point, Dave?
Well, I'm glad you said that, because just because you have a turning point doesn't mean somebody's going to learn from it. You have to be paying attention and be on the lookout for them.
Right.
So for example, when I was transitioning out of staffing into seminar presentations and coaching, one of my clients said, "Can you do me a favor? I just read this great book on leadership. It's fantastic, but I can't get any of my team leaders to read it. If I lend you the book, could you read it and then teach it to the people that work here, and I'll pay you to do that?" And you know, there's an old joke about being a consultant. A consultant is somebody who does the same thing as you, except he's from out of town. And they say a consultant is somebody who you pay to wear your watch so he could tell you what time it is. So now I had a client who was paying me to read a book, which I love to do anyway, teach it to the same people that work for him, and he would pay me to do that. And I realized I could make money doing this. I love this. And so I just started reading everything I could.
Yeah.
And the more I read, the more material I had, and the more people I could help.
Wow, that's great. So what happens if you don't act on a turning point?
Well, have no fear if you don't. Life is full of turning points, because a turning point will lead you to a right path, but not the only right path. So your life might unfold differently, but it doesn't mean it's going to be bad.
Right.
Nobody ever said, I'm sure, in the entire history of the world, when I grow up, I want to be a printing industry headhunter. That's
Right.
just my path. And I'm so glad that that's what it was.
Yeah. A turning point from a client. Have you gotten any?
I remember one significant one when I first got started. I'd say this happened in the first or second year. And I met this man who was older than me and had been in the business for many, many years. And he was also a trainer. And he would come to my seminars occasionally, and he had this joke that he would say when he introduced himself. He said, "I'm here on the CASE method." That stands for copy and steal everything. And of course, everybody would laugh. And I remember the last time he came to one of my seminars, he said, "I always tell people when I come to Dave's seminars that is because of the CASE method. But the truth is, I love to hear a story well told. And Dave Romeo is a master storyteller." I had never heard anybody say that before. And it stayed with me. And I thought,
Wow.
I'm actually making my living telling stories. I didn't even know a grown man was allowed to do that.
Right.
And yet that's really the definition of what I do.
Yeah. Well, you write books and you've written a lot, and you ended up writing 2 in the same day.
Well, I published 2 in the same day.
All right.
And the other one is called A Clear Path to Heaven.
Okay. Tell us how it came about.
Well, the tagline is how to use God's gifts to join Him for eternity. And what happened was one of our mutual friends, Dwight Smith, was a guest speaker at one of my seminars. And Dwight's topic was raising millionaires.
Right.
So he wanted people to teach their kids how to be financially well off. And he asked a question right at the very beginning. And he said, I want you to think about this and tell me what the answer is. What do you want most? That was his only question. And everybody just sat there for a few minutes writing it down. And as I thought about it, the only thing that I could think of to answer that was a clear path to heaven. And that's where that seed took root. And ever since he said that, that's all I could think of. And that was very important to me.
Okay. So what's it about, and how is it related to learning from your turning points too?
Well, because it came from another turning point from my dad when I was a boy. I always had trouble with math. And one thing he tried to drill into my head over and over and over again was, math is a science. It has to work out.
Okay.
And what I took from that is how important it was if there was a formula that you could follow, step 1, step 2, step 3, you knew what was going to happen. So that always stayed with me. So just to set this up for you, to make it nice and simple for the viewers, okay, everybody knows about heaven and hell. Well, there's also purgatory. So if you're not ready to go to heaven, but you might be able to, you might spend some time in purgatory. And there's 2 quotes that I found that just have always stayed with me. They terrify me. And this is the 2 quotes. These are from visions of people in purgatory. And it said, the smallest suffering is more poignant than the most cruel torments on earth. Now imagine that. And the second one was, the sufferings of the souls in purgatory are so great that a single day appears to them like 1,000 years. So you think about that, and that's such a horrible thought. Now the difference between purgatory and hell is purgatory ends, but it doesn't end. We don't know when it ends, and it could be till the end of the world for some people. So this is what I try to figure out. There are indulgences. Now, an indulgence, for somebody who doesn't know, it's a prayer you could say that reduces the amount of time in purgatory. And there are so many of them. I found this book. It's a collection. Raccolta means collection.
Okay.
There's over 700 pages. You see how big this is. It's kind of hard to carry it around with you. So what I did was I started finding the little short ones. Some of them are 3 words long. And I thought, wouldn't that make more sense if you used it more frequently? And then this is what I found that certainly intrigued me in my research. There is a prayer for St. Gertrude, and it has a promise. And it says, if you say this prayer, every time you say it, 1,000 souls will be freed from purgatory to go to heaven. So I used to think to myself, you know what? If I say it 6 times a day, every day, more than 2 million souls will go to heaven. And then I thought, could I empty purgatory? Well, what I didn't know was how many people were there. So I was trying to find it out, and in my research, this is what I found. There was, St. Alfonso said, when the Blessed Mother assumed into heaven, she asked her son to empty purgatory. So according to the research, that would have been around 46 AD. So in other words, 1976 years from now, or from then. And I thought, okay, there's 2 words, Diane, that have always intrigued me in my whole life. You know what they are?
What?
What if?
Ah, okay.
What if there was a way that you could empty purgatory forever? So I started putting things together, and I was doing the math, and math is not my strength anymore. So what I did was I used that statement my father said, math is a science. It has to work out. So in other words, if you plug in the right numbers, you know what your outcome is.
Okay.
So I used 3 mathematicians to check my math and the calculations, and I checked with 2 bishops for the Catholic dogma, and this is what I found out. If 820 people said the prayer 10 times a day, purgatory would be emptied in under 3 years. And once it's emptied, I mean, you have people that die every year. 24 people saying the prayer every day would keep purgatory empty until the end of the world.
Okay.
And that just fascinated me so much.
Wow. You used your math, and your Roman Catholic faith is the basis for
Yes.
this book. Okay. And there are also additional prayers that you put in?
Yes, well, one of the things I wanted to do is not make another occultist, 700 pages, so I wanted to keep the book small. So what I
Right.
did was, I figured these prayers have been around since, 2,000 years. What I'll do is, I'm just going to make them into PDFs, like this one that
okay.
I made for myself. So this is for people that are familiar with the rosary. I lead the rosary, and so I have a large print copy of how to
Okay.
say everything. And I said, why can't I just make other prayers available? And anytime somebody buys the book, they just send me an email, and I just email them all 25 pages.
Okay. One thing we have to make sure that we cover is Dave Romeo Online University. Tell us
Yes.
about that.
Well, that's another goal that I have. By the time I finish doing all of my seminars, there'll be over 100 of them. And so for the last 2 years, what I've been doing is recording all the seminars and making them into seminar videos. And by the end of 2023, every single seminar will be available there.
Wow. Wow. Some final insights on learning from your turning points.
One of the biggest revelations I had was this, that one turning point could create an entire series of other turning points. So for example, in the mid 80s, I was suffering from a broken heart. That led me to throw myself into bass fishing. That led me to get into the Guinness Book of World Records. And what that did for my confidence, it just shot it through the roof. And it helped me overcome my lifelong fear of public speaking. As a result of that, I became a motivational speaker and a television host. All I can say is, what a ride.
Absolutely, what a ride. So where do we find these books? Where do we go, and how are they available?
Very easy. All the books are available at daveromeo.com.
That's so easy to remember, and we have that on the screen as well. Once again, it's been a pleasure to have you here. There's always a lot of insight that you bring and you share with us.
Thanks for having me, Diane.
Thank you for being here. We'd like to say thank you to you for joining us as well. I'm Diane Dayton on Behind the Lines, reminding you to look behind the lines. You might be surprised what you find.